Welcome, Angela Duckworth, to the Near and Far podcast. It's great to have you here. So I have to tell the listeners, I'm sure most of them are familiar with you. Of course, you're a professor at UPenn. You're the very famous author of Grit, and I'm a big fan of your work. I have been for years and years. And recently, I heard you on your fantastic podcast called No Stupid Questions, which you host with Stephen Dubner. And I've been a subscriber for a long time. Everyone should go out there and subscribe. It's a fantastic podcast. And recently, I heard you say something that kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. You said that you were not a procrastinator, that you did not procrastinate when it came to work. And I thought, how can that be? How does anybody not procrastinate? Basically, I looked up your email, I sent you a message, and I thought, she's probably too busy to reply. 9 minutes later, I get your email back, perfectly on brand, saying, yeah, sure, let's chat about it. And so I really appreciate you taking the time. And I have so many questions, but let's start with this idea of a person who doesn't procrastinate. I thought everyone procrastinated.
Okay, so to be fair to myself, I was saying that I don't procrastinate in the context of, if you ask me, like, you don't have any self-control problems, I would say no. I have two in particular. I have a bad temper. And also, I think I have what the, biblical sort of like the pride sin, the seven deadly sins. I mean, I do think I can be arrogant and, self-centered. So I would say that I struggle least with procrastination of the things that people say they struggle with. I almost never do, but I am not marketing myself as a, self-control perfect person.
Sure. Yeah. So that's great to hear that you are human, which is fantastic to hear because But I'm sure part of the reason that you've accomplished so much in your professional life is because you don't procrastinate. So tell us more about that. How come in the work context you don't procrastinate? And have you always been that way?
I think I have been a low to zero procrastinator for much of my life. I cannot remember a time where things for days or weeks that I should have started. I am not the sort of person who does things at the last minute. You've seen data. I've seen data. It's like typically this bunching, it's like due on Thursday and then all the assignments flood in. I mean, you don't even need to be a social scientist. You need just to be a teacher, right? It's like, projects are due on Friday. That's when you're going to get them. You're not going to get them on Thursday, but I'm more of it's due in 2 weeks. Okay, let me make a timetable and get started. So it's something that I, can't give you a full explanation for why that is. I think there are at least two reasons. I mean, you and I are both blessed to have work that we love and don't dread. So I don't really have a sense of wanting to not start. When I wake up in the morning, I come downstairs because the kitchen's like one floor below, and I hit boil on the hot water maker. And while the coffee is being made, I start working. It's not like I have anything that I'd rather do. Like, I don't want to read the newspaper. I don't want to scroll through the headlines. I don't want to look at social media. I just start working. So that's one thing. I do love my work. And I think the second thing is, and I don't know that it's always good. I think that for me, if I have a problem, like right now I'm thinking about something and I can't solve it. And it's like, I not only don't procrastinate, I don't even sleep. I'm just like constantly thinking about it. And it's very hard for me to not work on it while it's unsolved.
Okay, so it sounds like for things you enjoy, procrastination is not a problem, which makes sense, right? That's the whole Csikszentmihalyi, get into the flow of things for tasks you enjoy. I guess, what about the things you don't enjoy? When it's maybe not in a professional context, but other tasks, right? Doing your taxes or I don't know, other stuff that you just don't really like to do. Do you procrastinate on that stuff?
Oh, that's fair. So you might say, Angela, the things that leap to mind are all the things that you like to do. So of course you're saying that you don't procrastinate, but maybe the things that are not leaping to mind are all the things that I hate to do. Maybe I procrastinate on them so much I've forgotten them altogether. You mentioned taxes. So we have a ridiculously traditional division of labor in our marriage. My husband, Jason, does all the taxes. When I met him, I was doing this like single page tax form called the 1040 EZ. And he was horrified. He's like, you don't have any deductions. Like, it's like far from optimal. I was like, I don't care. It's like one page. Isn't that great? One page double-sided, but still one page. So I don't know that I don't procrastinate on things that I don't like to do, but you're probably familiar with this research on job crafting. I mean, I do think that if there's something that you can outsource, even if it's to your spouse, or just otherwise find like a creative and legal workaround. Like, oh, I don't have to do it at all because whatever X, Y, or Z. So I feel like my life has been curated to some extent, like down to the fact that like I have to make coffee, I have to do my work, and many other tasks that I don't like doing are including taxes. Um, are managed by somebody else. So maybe that's another reason why I don't
Mm,
procrastinate. I've
mm.
managed to avoid those tasks.
But in your professional life, there must be things that about your day to day job that also feel like drudgery. Is that how do you get through those?
So if I had to think of specific examples of things that I just think are like, oh gosh, I like really have to do that. That's horrible. Well, first of all, you're making me realize that yeah, I mean, I keep getting this email from human resources at my university to some training that I must be procrastinating on because the emails are getting more insistent. I think I'm over deadline to do some official form that I haven't done. So there. But if I think of other specific examples, like I don't know, like sometimes I dread a meeting because I know it's not going to be very productive, but I know I have to have the meeting or I have to work on some project, and just like that part of it is really tedious, right?
Yeah.
As a teacher, I love my students, but I hate looking through all their feedback. I ask for feedback every class, and it's on a scale from 0, you wasted all of my time, to 10, like you blew my mind in a good way. And then there are all these open-ended comment boxes. And I don't really love looking through all the things where it's like, what's another thing I could do better? What's another thing I could do better? So how do I avoid procrastination on that? There was this research paper that came out by Ayelet Fishbach on goal fusion. She's not the only author. It's also Aryeh Kruglansky. And they both worked on goals for a long time, arguably their whole careers. But the idea of goal fusion is if, say, you have a tedious task, like I have to look through all the comments about my lecture so I can revise my plan for the next lecture, but that's not that fun. Goal fusion is that you take that goal and you fuse it with the goal above it, the sort of the why. Like why do you need to do that? Oh, because it's important for me that my students actually get a better class. So my higher level goal is, teach a better class, but my low
Mm,
level goal is go through all the feedback. And the idea of goal fusion is you can in your mind put them together so that while you are going through your feedback, you can say to yourself, I'm not going through my feedback. I am teaching a better class to my students.
mhm.
And I think that cognitive trick actually works for me. So sometimes I do, pull a goal fusion and I try to say to myself, like, oh, I'm not doing this tedious thing. I'm doing the fill in the blank higher level goal that serves.
That's a good one. Yeah, and so when it comes to your main work, I know for me, you've written a very successful book, and for me, when I was writing, I love the topic. I'm super passionate about it, but there's that crank factor of like, oh, I gotta sit down and write these words. Does that ever happen to you?
Well, I want to know, like, what was it like for you? Like, what was the hardest part of writing your books?
The hardest part of writing the book, which actually was the most satisfying, was getting down the conceptual model. So I'm a big fan. So I'm not a PhD, but I rely on the work of fantastic people like you to kind of put together a model, a picture, and that actually took the longest amount of time and was the most annoying in terms of how much effort it took, was just to put these concepts into some kind of visual. I love to have some kind of picture that I can use to teach a concept. And so creating the hook model, these 4 parts, and creating the indistractable model with 4 parts and a picture that was good enough to remember and be and relatable enough so that others could learn it. That took me the longest, but that was also the hardest because I had to figure out what to exclude. So that took a really, really long time, probably more time
Did
than
you
actually writing the
procrastinate?
book. I
Did you?
did
Yeah.
procrastinate on it. Okay, so that part I actually enjoyed, and there was a lot of energy there. But then once I kind of, in my mind, cracked the formula, what I definitely had trouble getting to work on and definitely procrastinated on was writing it out word for word. Because like what's exciting to me is the big idea. That's super
Interesting.
energizing. But
Yeah.
then I already
Yeah.
know the big idea. Now I got to sit down and I'll tell you another thing I procrastinate on all the
Right. The
time.
punchline's already been, delivered. So now
Exactly.
you have to go back and write the joke, and that's not as fun.
Exactly.
So I'm jealous. I mean, I will say this, I am, struggling. I mean, mightily struggling. It's humbling. Um, like I'm, I cannot tell you how hard it is for me to like, I'm working on a book on the power of the immediate situation to determine what you think, feel, and do. And I'm excited about the idea, but there's something about like this part of, structuring the sequence of like, how many chapters going to be and like, what's the flow. I really, really struggle. I think
Mm,
with procrastination there, I think there are two things. One makes you get to work and the other one doesn't. The thing that doesn't, and I think the thing that would incline you to, I think uncertainty. Like you don't know what to do. I think people do things when it's there's a big yellow button that
mm,
says click
mm,
here. Like we don't but if you just don't know, like you wake up and you're like, and now what do I do? Do I reread my notes? Do I make another outline? Should I have a Zoom call with somebody who knows this area of expertise more? Should I read this book that I got out of the library? Like I do think that argues against action. But for me, the reason why that gets overwhelmed is that I have this other thing, which is like I just have this like weight on my chest when I can't figure something out and I can't sleep and I can't eat and I'm just
mm,
obsessed
mm.
with it. So I probably have both of those forces, but one of them is bigger than the other. And the impelling force that like moves me forward creakily is just larger than not knowing what the hell I'm doing, which is actually a good description of where I am.
Yeah, interesting. And that's what I guessed. I think a lot of people who are like you, and there are very few people like you who don't procrastinate, but I think a common trait, I know we have a mutual friend, Adam Grant, seems to me, he's also what he calls a precrastinator. It seems to me that there's this like, this burning pain, this discomfort of if I don't do this, bad things will happen. Do you think that outweighs or is more important than the joy of the task itself?
I don't want to make judgments for anyone. I think that I have this like pen pal correspondence with a student who graduated, gosh, now years ago. I'm losing count how many years it is. And when he graduated, I realized that, to my surprise, I was like the closest faculty member to him. And just thinking about this kid who kind of, in my mind needed a little mentoring, I was like, why don't you write me a note every Sunday by email and I'll write you back? And now we've been doing it for years. Um, and in our recent correspondence, I said, I realize now after years that like you really want to have joy and curiosity in what you do. And that is the most important thing. Whether there's a career progression, whether there's like a higher level purpose, whether, society gets like measurably better, these are things that may matter to other people. But, for you, you're just really curious. And like, do I have
Mm,
that right? He was like, yep. So I don't want to legislate for anybody else, like what should be the most important, really. And that's not humble bragging and that's not false, piety. It's literally, I'm like, I don't know what other people's utility functions are.
mm,
But for me, like joy, like, was it fun? I think that is less important for me than it is for many other people. Like,
mm.
I want to produce something that is very fine. I'm mindful that I'll not be alive for another half century. I mean, I'm 53, so like probably at least at halftime, if not more. And I'm like, I want to do something that is excellent
Mm,
and I want to be gratified. But, if it's not fun, I think that's okay for me.
yeah.
For me, for Angela, not for everybody.
Of course, yeah. I guess I could have predicted that answer in terms of your work on grit. So that's very much on brand. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
a little bit of knee search there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, another thing, I was thinking as you were asking, like, what kind of things do I procrastinate on? One thing that always is tough for me is I love to give great presentations. I love to be on stage. I love to present and see people's eyes open, and I can see that they get a concept that's going to help them. But I hate rehearsing a speech. I don't know if that's something that you feel, especially because I know the punchline, as you said. Even though I know it makes such an impact, and there's no way around it. You have to practice a talk thousands of times. When you see someone give a TED talk as great as yours, I know how much effort you put into that. But is that something you struggle with at all?
I think I cheat in that I don't practice my talks, but I think I have so much practice in, repeated performances of the talk that
Mm,
it is practice. It's just that, the performance has to count. This is probably a bad habit going back to sight reading all of my lessons when I was taking piano as a little girl, and I got really good at sight reading. So I guess my piano lessons ended up being like the small amount of practice I had. So again, I'm not recommending this to anybody, but I know what you mean, and I do think, look, look, you can't outsource everything and you can't avoid everything. I'm like, oh, I have a little trick for that. I don't do it at all because of this other thing, but obviously there are times where you do have to figure out how to. And I will say this: I know there's all kinds of popular TED talks about how procrastination leads you to creativity, but the I don't know him, but the scholar who I think has done the most substantive work on procrastination is Piers Steele, and
Mm.
I read a lot of his work, and I think his view, he should certainly speak for himself, and you should ask him, is that it's just a form of impulsivity. It really is. It's a failure of self control. It's doing something now that feels good now, but is not good for you later. And I think procrastination neatly fits that definition. Like, people regret procrastinating and so forth. So again, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm saying that, like, it is something we all have to reckon with. And for those who are like, it's great, like, it's actually the secret to creativity. I think on balance, it's not.
Yeah.
That's just my opinionated perspective on it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think if you look at the work output of people who planned ahead and say, okay, I'm going to put in bits of time. I'm a big advocate of time boxing. It sounds like you do something similar. I'm going to put in a little bit of effort as opposed to cramming right before. The work output is way better when you have that time to deliberate on something in small bits versus having to do it all in the last minute. No doubt about that. And in terms of
Yeah,
your
we are in
impulse.
violent agreement.
Yes, absolutely. But the struggle though, and I totally agree with you. It is absolutely an impulse control problem. But the challenge always is, and it's interesting how you say it's in different life domains. I'm curious if you could kind of get into that in terms of where you find that you have really good impulse control when it comes to work, right? Because there's, whether it's the discomfort of not doing the task and the joy of the work itself. So impulse control isn't a problem at work. Where are the areas where impulse control is more of an issue, and how do you manage those uncomfortable sensations?
So I mentioned that I have a bad temper, and sometimes I say that to my lab, my graduate students, and I think one of them is like, "Oh yeah, you do," and the other one's like, "I don't know," because like, the one who's experienced it is like, "Oh yeah, she's gonna be like awful." So I happen to have a collaboration with James Gross, who is, um, a world authority, not the world authority, because there's more than one, on motion regulation. He's at Stanford. So he's actually given me both, like professional collaboration advice, but also just like personal advice. Like, like, James, oh my gosh, I lost it. Like, let's talk about it. So I will say that, there are two classes of strategies that you can use on any self-control problem, but including regulating your emotions, which is what James studies and what I struggle with the most. So one class of strategies are situational strategies, the other class are cognitive strategies. So one are like actually changing your situation, the other are like changing the way you think about your situation or what you're paying attention to, like things that are in your head, really. So in terms of my bad temper, I try to do both, right? Like, how can I reframe this from a third person perspective so that I can take, like, the other person's point of view more and not be so mad at them because I'm like ignoring everything that they're thinking and feeling. That's the cognitive side. But I will say that in my own personal life, I really am trying to do situational things. So, for example, like, some of the worst arguments I've had with my husband have been around like the holiday time. It's the end of the year, everything's due, like all the reports are due. There's a lot of social obligation that somehow puts us both in a bad mood. There's like a lot of family stuff that always dredges up, memories. And when I lose my temper, like, it's usually in December. So
Mm.
I asked James Gross one year, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, I know I'm in the wrong largely. Like,
Mm.
it's not 50-50. Like, what can I do? And we started to lay out some of these stressors. It's like, okay, well, like, can you reduce the number of holiday parties that you go to? And I was like, well, I should really be like, you know what? Honestly, yes. I don't have to go to every holiday party. Like, can you make some deadlines in January, not in December? Like, if you can, like, yes. Like, can you take a couple of days off from work so you can just like manage some of these family things and not feel like you're like stretched thin? Yes. Can you like have a conversation in the very beginning of December to like just brace yourself with, your family? Like, okay, this is going to be a hard month, and I lose my temper, and I'm going to really try not to. So those are all situational things, like telling other people things managing your commitments. And I guess if you ask me like what is keeping me up at night, literally, I am writing another book. And it really is, I think that people are well aware of these cognitive strategies, like I should reframe it, I should pay attention differently, et cetera. But I think these situational ones, like literally change your situation, like just
Mm,
make it so that you don't have as many things to do. Um, I've been reading a lot of B.F. Skinner lately and so forth. I guess I feel like, part of this is obvious, and yet part of this is not so obvious. Somehow we don't feel like that's the same thing as using self-control. Like if I literally change my situation, somehow that's not actually doing the thing that is called
mm,
self-control. But
mm,
it is a thing, I think, and James, I think, would agree with me, that is often the most efficient thing you can do, which is to avoid the terrible temptation in the first place. Like I just installed this app on my phone. This is called One Sec. And like when you click on the app that you're trying to avoid, which for me is email, because yeah, I guess I am a workaholic. So apparently I've tried to open my Gmail 31 times in the last 24 hours. And when you click on the app that you're trying to avoid, which I installed as Gmail with this One Sec app, it takes 1 second and then another second. And during that second, it says breathe in, breathe out. And then it gives you this screen. And then you have to click like, I don't want to open Gmail, which is the big white button, or continue to Gmail, which is like in smaller, well, it's not smaller, but it's under it. And it's significantly reduced my my use of this app that has been like interrupting my thinking process. And
mm.
that is a situational strategy. I didn't have to reframe anything. I didn't have to reappraise anything. I didn't have to direct my, it's like I installed this app and I'm not using this app,
Yeah.
this time waster anymore. And there is, by the way, I know you like science. So there is an article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showing that this app reduces unwanted app use by something like 57% in 6 weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a ton of these types of apps that I put in the book Indistractable and we have online. I'll put in the show notes as well. But yeah, they're
Yeah, this
amazing.
one is new because it came out after your book.
Yeah. Well, it's called One Sec, right?
Yeah, it's called One Sec, like
Yeah.
ONE space SEC.
We'll put a link in the show notes as well. Yeah. These tools, I love them because they essentially interrupt the interruption, right? It's that momentary pause of helping you gain some insight, some mindfulness between the stimulus and the response. And that's so hard to do, right?
I
When you
mean,
think about
I can't believe I've been opening I was like, oh, I don't, when I first mentioned this app to, I have a postdoc who did his PhD with Wendy Wood, in the
Mm,
Habit Lab. And I was telling him about this paper and I was telling him about this app. And I was like, I just installed it with Facebook, even though I don't use Facebook because I just want to see
mm,
how it works. And he was like, oh, you don't have anything that tempts you? And I was like, no. And then he was like, what about your Gmail? And I
email,
was like, oh
yeah.
gosh, you know me well. So then I installed it on this, and I literally can't believe that I've tried to open Gmail 31 times in the last 24 hours. That's ridiculous. I had no idea. So it interrupts the interruption, and it brings things to conscious awareness that we're really not conscious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If only we could have that same tool, when it's 9 p.m. and I've already had dinner, but I want a little munchies and I, start snacking at night. I need
Yeah,
this app for on the chocolate bar or whatever it is at night. Well,
absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Someone will invent that, I hope.
yeah. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. It was fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much. Was there anything that we didn't cover that maybe you'd like to mention?
No, but you were very kind in your words, but I've been an admirer of yours, and we run in the same circles, and lots of people have lots of nice things to say about you and your translation of all this scientific research for the greater good. So thanks for having this conversation with me.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much. And everyone, definitely go check out No Stupid Questions, fantastic podcast. And of course, Angela's book, Grit, is wonderful. It's essential reading. Thanks again, Angela Duckworth. Great to see you.